He was a man they called mad, an engineer whose ideas were so radical the Navy laughed him out of the room. They gave him a submarine, not because they believed in him, but because they wanted to prove him a fool. But out in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic, as two state-of-the-art destroyers hunted for him, he was about to make them all eat their words. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The air on the bridge of the destroyer, the USS Biddle, was thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the ancient, damp smell of the sea. It was 1944, and the war was a beast that demanded constant innovation. Admiral Davies, a man whose face seemed carved from the granite cliffs of his native Maine, stared intently at the sonar station. His knuckles were white where he gripped the cold steel of the console, his entire being focused on the hunt. Below them, somewhere in the unforgiving gray depths, was the target, a ghost, a fool's errand. The sonar operator, a young man named Petty Officer Crane, whose face was still boyish under a sheen of nervous sweat, suddenly ripped his headphones off. His eyes were wide, his face pale as a corpse. "Sir, it's gone," he stammered, his voice a raw whisper that cut through the low hum of the bridge. "The target is just gone." Davies leaned in, his shadow falling over the young man. "What do you mean, gone? Report, Crane." One moment it was a faint whisper, "Sir, a weak return, but definitely there." The next, nothing. It's like the ocean just swallowed it whole. "That's impossible," Davies snapped, his voice a low growl of frustration. "No submarine can just vanish. Check your equipment. Now." Crane, his hands trembling slightly, fumbled with the dials, his movements jerky and uncertain. "I have, sir. Twice. I've run a full diagnostic. The equipment is functioning perfectly. There is nothing there." The silence on the bridge became a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the rhythmic, lonely pinging of the sonar sending its query out into an empty, silent sea. Each ping was a question asked to avoid, and the lack of an answer was more terrifying than any hostile return. 6 months earlier, the genesis of this impossibility was bubbling away in a laboratory that looked more like an alchemist's forgotten workshop. Dr. Robert Larkin's lab at the Washington Navy Yard was a chaotic symphony of creation and profound neglect. Blueprints, covered in frantic, scrawled equations, were piled so high on tables they threatened to avalanche onto the floor. Glass beakers, stained with the ghosts of 1,000 failed experiments, bubbled with a thick, black, tar-like substance that seemed to drink the light from the room. The air was a potent cocktail of burnt rubber, industrial solvents, and the singular, sharp scent of obsessive genius. Larkin himself was a whirlwind of contained energy, a man in his late 50s with a shock of untamed grey hair that stood on end as if in a perpetual state of surprise. His glasses were perched precariously on the end of his nose, and his lab coat was a Jackson Pollock masterpiece of chemical stains, each one a testament to a theory tested and discarded. Standing stiffly near the door, trying to maintain a pocket of sterile order in the maelstrom, was Lieutenant Jensen. Young, ambitious, and meticulously by the book, Jensen's pristine uniform was an affront to the lab's very existence. He had been assigned as Larkin's liaison, a post widely considered a career dead end, a place where promising young officers were sent to be forgotten. Larkin, not bothering to look up from a particularly volatile, bubbling vat, spoke as if continuing a conversation that had been going on for weeks. "They think of sonar as a shout in an empty canyon, Jensen, expecting a perfect echo every time. They're fools, all of them." He gestured with a ladle dripping with the black viscous goo. "A predictable echo is a death sentence in modern warfare. It's a dinner bell for torpedoes." He finally turned, and his eyes, magnified by his thick lenses, burned with a startling intensity. "But what if the canyon wall wasn't hard rock? What if it was a pillow? A thick, soft pillow that just soaks up the sound, smothers it, turns the shout into a whisper before it can ever return. This, my boy," he held the dripping ladle aloft like a scepter, "is that pillow." Jensen eyed the concoction, his nose wrinkling at the acrid smell. "It's rubber and oil, Doctor. With all due respect, it looks like roofing tar." "It's not tar," Larkin roared, a flash of anger crossing his face before being replaced by the weary frustration of a man who has explained the obvious too many times. "It's a non-Newtonian polymer with an anechoic matrix. The specific gravity of the vulcanized rubber particles, suspended in a hydrocarbon solution, creates a density gradient. It absorbs the acoustic energy from a sonar ping, converts it to a negligible amount of heat through molecular friction, and silences the echo. It makes solid steel as quiet as a column of water." His passion was a physical force, a wave of conviction that washed over Jensen. leaving him with a disquieting mix of pity for this clearly eccentric man, a sense of professional duty, and a tiny, unsettling spark of genuine curiosity. That spark was extinguished a week later in the sterile chill of a wood-paneled boardroom. The polished mahogany table was a vast, gleaming continent separating Larkin from the dozen high-ranking naval officers who sat in judgment. Their uniforms were immaculate, their faces impassive masks of bureaucratic authority. At the head of the table, Admiral Davies presided, his expression one of profound, bored impatience. He looked at Larkin as if he were a particularly unpleasant insect that had found its way into his water glass. Larkin, looking utterly out of place and slightly manic under the formal lighting, tried to explain his theory using messy hand-drawn diagrams. His passion, which had seemed so potent in the lab, here came across as unhinged. As he gestured wildly, he accidentally smudged one of his crucial diagrams with the black goo that seemed to be permanently embedded under his fingernails. A few of the younger officers shared a subtle, cruel smirk. Admiral Davies had seen enough. He cut Larkin off with a slice of his hand. "Dr. Larkin, let me be perfectly clear. You are proposing that we take our most advanced weapons, our multi-million-dollar submarines, and coat them in a layer of melted-down tires and grease, based on a theory you cooked up in your workshop." 1. "It's a laboratory, Admiral," Larkin retorted, his voice tight with indignation, "and the science is sound. The principles of acoustic impedance and energy dampening are well established." "The science sounds like something from a Jules Verne novel," Davies said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The United States Navy deals in steel and torpedoes, Doctor, not fantasy. We deal in proven results, not in tar and dreams." He was about to dismiss Larkin with a final, curt wave when a younger, more forward-thinking rear admiral, a man named Harrison, spoke up from the end of the table. Harrison had a reputation for being intrigued by unconventional ideas, a trait that often put him at odds with the old guard like Davies. "Robert," he said, his tone mild, "you mentioned a preliminary test in your proposal?" Larkin, seeing a sliver of hope, seized the chance. He explained how he had coated a 1-meter square steel plate and suspended it in a test tank at the yard. Using a small, calibrated hydrophone, he had found it reflected 90% less acoustic energy than an identical, untreated plate. The data was preliminary, but it was undeniable. Harrison leaned forward, intrigued by the hard numbers. He saw the flicker of triumph in Larkin's eyes and the simmering rage in Davies. He decided to play the politician. "Give him $1,000 and a rowboat, Davies," Harrison suggested, a slight smile playing on his lips. "If it keeps him out of our hair for a month, it's money well spent. Let him have his little experiment." Davies, annoyed at being challenged but unable to openly refuse a fellow admiral over such a paltry sum, reluctantly agreed. His consent was a dismissal in itself, a clear message that this was a bone being thrown to humor a madman, nothing more. The day of the first test was as gray and dreary as Admiral Davies' mood. On the choppy brown waters of the Potomac River, Larkin and Jensen chugged along on a small naval utility boat. The air was damp and cool, carrying the smell of the river and the faint, chemical scent of Larkin's coating. Larkin, his face a mask of intense concentration, carefully lowered a small, curved model of a submarine hull into the murky water. The black mixture clung to the steel in a thick, gloopy layer, seeming to absorb the very light around it. 50 yards away, a second boat held a portable sonar device, its rhythmic times ping, ping, ping times a steady heartbeat across the water. Jensen watched the small green screen of the sonar oscilloscope. He was a skeptic, but he was also a good officer, and he would conduct the test to the letter. First, they tested a standard, uncoated steel plate of the same size. The return was immediate and sharp, a bright, angry spike of light on the screen, a perfect echo. "All right," Jensen said into the radio handset. "Bring in the test model." Larkin maneuvered the coated hull into position. "Ready," he called out, his voice tight with anticipation. "Pinging now," the voice crackled back. Jensen leaned in, his eyes glued to the screen. The ping went out. He waited for the bright spike, but it didn't come. Instead, a dull, flattened wave materialized on the screen, a mere ghost of the previous signal. It wasn't gone, but it was distorted, indistinct. Fuzzy was the only word that came to Jensen's mind. He keyed the radio. "Run it again. Maximum gain." The second ping produced the same result, a blurry, ambiguous smear of light. Jensen, his skepticism wavering for the first time, stared at the screen. "My God," he whispered to himself. "It's not a clear signal. It's muffled. I've never seen a return signal that looks like that. It's like trying to see through frosted glass. A surge of raw triumph shot through Larkin. It works, he thought, a fierce joy battling with his gnawing impatience. He knew it would work, but as he looked at the indistinct wave on the oscilloscope in the other boat, he also knew this wasn't enough. A muffled signal was a curiosity, not a revolution. It wouldn't fool a determined sonar operator in the heat of battle. It wasn't the invisibility he had promised. It wasn't the silence he craved. He needed to perfect the formula. He needed more time, more resources. He needed a real submarine. Back in the sterile boardroom, the frosted glass sonar readings were projected onto a large screen. The blurry, indistinct waveform hung in the air like a ghost, a testament to a partial victory that felt, in this room, like a total defeat. Admiral Davies looked at the projection not with scientific curiosity, but with the deep, unwavering contempt of a man whose worldview had been mildly inconvenienced and was now being reasserted with force. He saw ambiguity where he demanded certainty, a question mark where he required a full stop. "Doctor," Davies began, his voice dangerously calm. "In the heat of battle, in the chaos of an Atlantic convoy under attack by a wolf pack, muffled and fuzzy are utterly useless distinctions. A torpedo doesn't care if the signal is blurry. It still finds its target. A depth charge still sinks a submarine, fuzzy echo or not." He gestured dismissively at the screen. "You have not created a tactical advantage. You have created a minor technical annoyance. You have wasted $1,000 and a month of our time." He turned to a stone-faced aide standing by the wall. "Cut his funding. The experiment is over. Dr. Larkin's special project is to be terminated, effective immediately." The words fell like guillotine blades. There was no appeal, no debate. The meeting was over. As Larkin gathered his messy diagrams, his hands trembling with a mixture of fury and humiliation, he could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from Davies. It was more than just a disagreement over science. It was a clash of philosophies, and the rigid, unyielding dogma of the old guard had won. In the days that followed, the whispers that had once been confined to shadowed corners now followed him openly. The nickname Mad Larkin became a common currency among the officers and shipyard workers. He would walk past groups of sailors who would fall silent, only to erupt in snickering laughter the moment he was out of earshot. He tried to secure meetings with other department heads, with anyone who might listen, but his calls went unanswered. His security clearance to the main submarine pens was quietly revoked. He was an outcast, a pariah in the very institution he was trying so desperately to save. The weight of it all began to press down on him. He would walk the docks at night, the massive, silent shapes of the Gato-class submarines looming in the darkness like sleeping leviathans. He could smell the salt and the diesel, hear the distant clang of metal on metal, the sounds of a navy at war. These were the ships being hunted, the homes for hundreds of men, sent into the crushing blackness of the deep. He felt the immense, suffocating weight of that war, a global struggle for survival, and the equally immense weight of his own apparent failure. He looked at his own hands, stained and calloused, and for the first time, he truly questioned himself. He saw the smirks, heard the laughter, felt the wall of institutional contempt. Were they right? Was he just a crazy old man chasing a fantasy while real men were fighting and dying in steel coffins? The doubt was a cold, heavy stone in his gut, and it threatened to drag him down into a darkness deeper than any ocean. He had believed so completely in his vision, but now, alone on the cold docks, his certainty felt like just another form of madness. Weeks bled into a month. Larkin's lab, once a place of chaotic creation, now felt like a tomb. It became even more disordered, a physical manifestation of his obsessive, desperate mind. He hadn't slept in what felt like days. Surviving on a diet of stale coffee and sheer stubborn force of will, he had barricaded himself in, surrounded by stacks of textbooks on fluid dynamics, polymer chemistry, and acoustic wave theory. He was a man adrift, clinging to the wreckage of his life's work. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed against the window panes of the lab, the wind howling a mournful dirge. Larkin was staring, bleary-eyed, at a page in a university textbook, a page he had read a dozen times before without truly seeing. It described the peculiar properties of a simple cornstarch and water mixture, a classic non-Newtonian fluid. It was a substance that behaved like a liquid when handled gently, but became almost solid when struck with force. A child could run across a pool of it, but would sink if they stood still. It hit him like a bolt of lightning, a jolt of pure intellectual electricity that shot through his exhausted body and set his mind ablaze. He had been so wrong, so stupidly, elegantly wrong. His entire approach was flawed. The coating shouldn't just be a passive absorber, a soft pillow. That was too simple, too predictable. It needed to be reactive. It needed to fight back. The pressure of the acoustic wave itself, the very energy of the sonar ping, should be the catalyst. The intense focused pressure should cause the coating to momentarily harden, its density shifting in a nanosecond to deflect the sound in chaotic, unpredictable directions, scattering it like light through a shattered prism. Meanwhile, a softer, more viscous outer layer would still absorb the residual energy. It needed 2 stages, a 1-to-2 punch of deflection and absorption. It needed a specific, unstable emulsion of oil suspended within the vulcanized rubber. The instability was the key. He leaped from his chair, a cry of pure, unadulterated revelation escaping his lips. He worked in a frenzy, a man possessed by a new and beautiful truth. The acrid smell of burning rubber filled the air as he scorched a batch, his calculations off by a few degrees. He didn't care. He started again, frantically mixing different viscosities of heavy machine oil, his hands covered in black grime, his face illuminated by the blue flame of a Bunsen burner. He muttered equations to himself, his mind a whirlwind of chemistry and physics. He was no longer a failure, no longer mad Larkin. He was a creator on the verge of a miracle. Hours later, covered in sweat and grease, but with eyes that burned with a brilliant, dangerous fire, he found Jensen. The young lieutenant was in the officers' mess, nursing a cup of coffee, looking weary and defeated himself. His association with Larkin had not gone unnoticed by his superiors. Larkin slammed his blackened hands down on the table, making Jensen jump. "I've got it, son," he hissed, his voice a low, urgent rasp. The formula was wrong. It was too simple, too stable. It needed to be alive, to react. I need to test it, tonight. Jensen stared at the man before him. This wasn't the defeated, shuffling figure he had seen wandering the yard. This was the whirlwind of genius he had first met, but amplified, honed to a razor's edge by failure and obsession. He saw the fire in Larkin's eyes, a blaze that was both brilliant and terrifying. He knew what Larkin was asking was impossible, a flagrant breach of a dozen regulations. But he also saw the unwavering certainty of a man who had looked into the void and seen the light on the other side. He knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut that was part fear and part exhilaration, that he couldn't say no. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "What do you need?" "We're going to borrow a submarine," Larkin said, a wild grin spreading across his face. The dead of night at the naval yard was a world of shadows and secrets. A deserted maintenance pier jutted out into the black, still water of the bay. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the pilings and the frantic, hushed work of 2 men who had no business being there. Larkin and Jensen were slathering the new coating onto a small, 2-man submersible used for harbor maintenance and cable inspection. It was little more than a steel bubble with a propeller, but it was all they needed. The new mixture wasn't the dull, tar-like substance from before. It had a strange, subtle shimmer to it, the suspended oil droplets catching the faint moonlight like a galaxy of microscopic stars. They slipped the sub into the water with a quiet splash and climbed inside the cramped cockpit. With Jensen at the controls of a small boat-mounted sonar unit they had also borrowed, Larkin piloted the small submersible out into the deeper channel of the bay. The plan was simple and insane. "All right, I'm at 50 yards. Larkin's voice crackled over the hard-wired telephone that connected them. "Give it a try." Jensen, his heart pounding against his ribs, sent out the first ping. He watched the oscilloscope, his breath held tight in his chest. A signal returned. It was fuzzy, distorted, even more so than the test on the Potomac. But it was undeniably there. A wave of disappointment washed over him. "It's still there, Robert," he said into the mouthpiece, his voice flat. "It's a mess, but I can see you." There was a pause, and then Larkin's voice came back, tight with excitement. "Of course you can. The emulsion hasn't been properly compressed. It needs pressure. I'm going deeper. Wait for my signal." The submersible tilted and began its descent. Jensen watched the depth gauge on his own console, tracking its progress into the crushing dark. 100 feet. 150. The pressure at that depth was immense, a colossal weight that would squeeze the very air from a man's lungs. He imagined it working on the hull, compressing the unstable coating, forcing the oil and rubber into a new, reactive state. "Try it now," Larkin yelled over the line, his voice strained. Jensen took a deep breath and sent out another ping. He stared at the screen. He waited, and he saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. The green line of the oscilloscope remained flat, tracing its patient, empty path across the screen. It was a blank, empty void. He frantically increased the gain, turning the dial until the static hissed in his ears. Still nothing. He sent out another ping, and another, each one a desperate shout into the darkness where the submersible should be. The silence that answered was profound and terrifying. His voice trembling, he spoke into the microphone, his professionalism gone, replaced by raw, primal fear. "Robert, where are you? I've lost you. Robert, talk to me. You're completely gone." Suddenly, with a great surge of displaced water, the submersible breached the surface not 10 feet from their small utility boat. The near collision sent a jolt of adrenaline through Jensen, and he scrambled to avoid being swamped. The black hull of the sub gleamed in the moonlight, water streaming from its strange, shimmering skin. The hatch popped open, and Larkin's face appeared, beaming with a look of pure, unadulterated, godlike triumph. Jensen was breathless, his heart pounding with a cocktail of fear and utter exhilaration. He was no longer just a liaison, a skeptical observer. He was a co-conspirator. He was a witness. He was a true believer. "My God, Robert," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "You did it. You actually made a submarine disappear." The next morning, two men, looking exhausted but radiating a powerful, shared resolve, stood before Rear Admiral Harrison in his office. They had bypassed Davies completely, an act of insubordination that could end both their careers. The data from their unauthorized test, a series of perfectly flat oscilloscope readings, was laid out on his polished desk. Larkin, who had been a frantic, disheveled mess for months, now stood tall. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and clear, devoid of the manic energy that had so often undermined him. "Admiral," he began, "I apologize for breaking every rule in the book. There is no excuse for our actions, only a reason." He gestured to the data. "The results speak for themselves. This technology, this coating, can make our submarines functionally immune to active sonar. It can change the balance of power in the Battle of the Atlantic. It can save thousands of lives." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Then, he made his final, desperate gamble. "Give me one operational fleet submarine and a full-scale sea trial under simulated combat conditions. If I'm wrong, if it fails in any way, I will accept a dishonorable discharge, and you will never hear my name again. I will disappear. But if I'm right," he leaned forward, his eyes locking with Harrison's, "if I'm right, we will give our boys a ghost's cloak to wear in the dark." Admiral Harrison was silent for a long time. He studied the clean, undeniable data from the night test. He saw the fierce, unwavering conviction in Larkin's eyes, and he saw the quiet, steadfast support from Jensen, a young officer who had clearly risked everything to stand by this man. Harrison was a pragmatist, but he was also a visionary. He understood that wars were won not just with steel, but with ideas, and the idea laid out before him was the most revolutionary he had ever encountered. He made a decision. He picked up the phone on his desk. "Get me the Chief of Naval Operations," he said to his aide. He was going over Davies' head, straight to the top. When Admiral Davies found out, he was incandescent with fury. He had been overruled, his authority subverted by a madman and a junior officer. But it was too late. The order had come down from the highest level of the Navy. Larkin would get his submarine. She was the USS Lionfish, a battle-hardened fleet submarine with a seasoned, skeptical crew. The test was scheduled for 3 months' time. The stakes were now impossibly, terrifyingly high. It was all or nothing. The USS Lionfish sat in the cavernous belly of dry dock, like a great steel beast, undergoing a strange and unnatural transformation. Under the harsh, unforgiving glare of massive industrial lights, the familiar gray hull of the fleet submarine was disappearing, inch by painstaking inch, beneath a thick, hot, black skin. Work crews in heavy overalls, their faces obscured by respirators, moved with a practiced rhythm, wielding spray guns that hissed and spat the dark mixture onto the curved steel plates. The air was thick with the acrid, chemical smell of the hot rubber and oil compound, a scent that clung to the back of the throat and seemed to coat the world in a greasy film. Dr. Robert Larkin stood on a scaffolding platform, not as a chaotic inventor, but as a field commander overseeing the most critical operation of his life. His usual wild shock of hair was tamed by the damp air, and his eyes, sharp and focused, missed nothing. He directed the crews with curt, precise gestures, ensuring the coating was applied to the exact thickness his calculations demanded, a uniform sheath from the nose to the tail fins. He was no longer the madman of the laboratory. He was the architect of a new reality. The submarine's crew watched from a safe distance, a cluster of men in dungarees, their arms crossed, a mixture of raw curiosity and open derision on their faces. They were sailors of the line, men who understood the unforgiving physics of pressure and the brutal mechanics of torpedoes. This strange, alchemical process felt like a desecration of their ship, their home. "Look at this," A young sailor with a wispy mustache muttered to his friend, just loud enough to be heard over the hiss of the sprayers. "Larkin's lunatic lacquer. I give it one dive before it starts peeling off like sunburned skin. Bet you a week's pay it's gone as soon as we hit 10 knots. His friend grunted in agreement. "They're painting a target on us, is what they're doing. A big, black, sticky target." The submarine's captain, Commander Reynolds, a pragmatic, no-nonsense veteran of 3 arduous war patrols in the Pacific, detached himself from the knot of observers. His face was weathered, his eyes holding the quiet, steady confidence of a man who had taken his boat through hell and brought his men back alive. He approached Larkin on the scaffolding, his boots ringing on the steel gangway. He ran a gloved hand over a newly coated section of the hull. The surface was strange, not quite solid, with a slightly tacky, yielding quality, like the skin of some deep-sea creature. Reynolds looked from his hand to the doctor, his expression neutral, impossible to read. "Doctor," he said, his voice a low baritone that carried easily over the industrial noise. "My men and I have taken this boat through hell and back. We trust our steel. We know how she sounds, how she creaks, how she handles in a steep dive. I can't say I have the same confidence in your paint." He chose the word deliberately, a small jab to test the doctor's composure. Larkin, however, did not rise to the bait. He simply met the commander's gaze, his own eyes filled with a grim, unshakable determination. "It is not paint, Commander. It is a second skin, and it will be the quietest skin this Navy has ever seen." He turned his attention back to the workers. "All I ask, Commander, is that you follow the test procedure exactly as written. Give my science the chance to speak for itself." Reynolds held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "My orders are to give you a fair trial, Doctor. I will execute those orders to the letter. Just try not to get us all killed." He turned and walked back toward his men, leaving Larkin alone with the hissing guns and the smell of his impossible dream becoming a vast black reality. The day of the test dawned cold and gray, the sky a uniform, oppressive sheet of metallic cloud that merged seamlessly with the churning expanse of the Atlantic. 2 of the Navy's most advanced destroyers, the USS Biddle and the USS Cooper, carved white wakes through the slate, colored water, patrolling a designated search grid with lethal efficiency. On the bridge of the Biddle, Admiral Davies stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a porcelain mug of coffee warming his hands. An air of smug, unassailable confidence radiated from him. He was here to personally witness the final, humiliating failure of Mad Larkin, to put the last nail in the coffin of this ridiculous, career-threatening fantasy. He took a slow sip of his coffee and glanced at his sonar chief, Petty Officer Crane, the same young man who had been on duty during the initial, baffling disappearance. "He's out there somewhere, Crane," Davies said, his voice laced with condescending amusement. "A big, slow pig covered in tar. Find him. I want this farce concluded before lunch. We have a war to fight." "Aye, sir," Crane replied, though his own confidence was not nearly as robust. The memory of that silent, empty screen was still a cold knot in his stomach. Miles away and 200 feet below the turbulent surface, the tension inside the USS Lionfish was thick enough to cut with a knife. The submarine moved through the crushing blackness with an unnatural quiet. They were running on silent electric motors, the massive diesel engines cold and still. The only sounds were the quiet ambient hum of essential machinery, the low whisper of the ventilation system, and the occasional unnerving creak of the hull as it flexed under the immense pressure of the deep. The crew was silent, their earlier jokes and grumbling forgotten. This was no longer a game, no longer an experiment. They were the hunted, and the ships above were armed with live depth charges. Dr. Robert Larkin stood near the sonar station, his body as rigid as a steel girder, his knuckles white where he clutched a tarnished silver stopwatch, a gift from his late wife. Every muscle in his body was coiled with a terrifying mixture of anxiety and hope. Decades of work, a lifetime of ridicule, all of it came down to these next few hours. Commander Reynolds' voice cut through the silence, calm and professional, a lifeline of stability in the tense atmosphere. "Take her down to 200 feet. All ahead slow. Rig for silent running." The orders were relayed, and the crew moved with the quiet efficiency of men who knew their jobs blindfolded. The Lionfish settled at its new depth, a black ghost in a black ocean, waiting. The hunt began. The powerful active sonars of the Biddle and the Cooper began their rhythmic interrogation of the depths. The piercing pings, sharp and insistent, were not just heard but felt inside the Lionfish, a physical vibration that reverberated through the hull and into the very bones of the crew. The men flinched with each one, an involuntary reaction to the sound that, for any submariner, meant discovery and death. They were being hammered by the sound, yet they were sworn to silence. But on the bridge of the Biddle, the sonar room was eerily quiet. Petty Officer Crane stared at his oscilloscope, his brow furrowed in concentration. The green line traced its path, showing the clutter of the deep, the ambient noise of the ocean itself. He saw the faint returns from schools of fish, the distorted signals from thermal layers where cold and warmer water met. But of the massive, 1,000-ton steel submarine that he knew was somewhere in this patch of ocean, there was nothing. "Sir," Crane called out, his voice tight with a familiar, rising panic. "I'm getting nothing but ambient noise." Davies strode over to the sonar station, his heavy footsteps ringing on the deck. He peered at the screen, his face a mask of irritation. He has to be there. He was ordered into this grid. Increase the search frequency. Narrow the beam. "Aye, sir." Frequency increased. Beam narrowed, Crane confirmed, his hands flying across the controls. He sent out another series of pings, faster, more focused. He listened intently through his headphones, his eyes glued to the screen. He shook his head, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "Still nothing, Admiral. It's a ghost. There is no metallic return signature. None." Inside the Lionfish, Commander Reynolds listened to the relentless pinging of the destroyers. He could tell by the strength of the sound waves that they were close, dangerously close. His training, his every instinct, screamed at him to turn away, to put his stern to the hunters and run for the deep. But Larkin's instructions, the madman's battle plan, called for the exact opposite. Larkin, his eyes on his stopwatch, stepped closer to the commander. "Now, Commander," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Now is the time." Reynolds took a deep breath, his knuckles white on the periscope grips. He was betting the lives of his 80-man crew on the theories of a man the entire Navy called a lunatic. He gave the order, "Right full rudder. Steer course 090." The helmsman repeated the order, and the Lionfish began a slow, deliberate turn. It was a suicidal move for any normal submarine, a course that would take them not away from the hunters, but directly between them. They were threading a needle, with a destroyer for each eye. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their trust in their captain warring with the sheer insanity of the maneuver. They could feel the sonar pings growing louder, more intense, hammering at the hull from both sides now. They passed within 900 yards of the USS Biddle, a range at which a sonar echo should have been a deafening, undeniable roar on Crane's equipment, a range at which a single depth charge would buckle their hull like a tin can. The destroyers heard nothing. They sailed right over their invisible target, their sonar beams deflected and absorbed into silence by Larkin's impossible skin. Once clear, Reynolds felt the tension in the control room begin to ease as the pinging grew fainter, moving away from them. He allowed a slow, incredulous grin to spread across his face. He raised the attack periscope, a silver needle rising from the black water. Through the lens, he saw them, the two destroyers, continuing their search pattern, completely, utterly oblivious, already nearly 2 miles behind them, and steaming in the wrong direction. He turned from the periscope, his eyes shining. He walked over to the radio operator. "Get me Hunter 1 on the primary frequency," he said, his voice filled with a newfound, joyous confidence. The operator's eyes went wide, but he complied. "Hunter 1, this is Silent Prey. Come in. Over." On the bridge of the Biddle, the unexpected radio message was met with a stunned, horrified silence. Every head snapped toward the radio speaker. Admiral Davies froze, the coffee mug slipping from his grasp and shattering on the deck. He grabbed the microphone from his communications officer, his voice choked with a rage born of pure disbelief. "Silent Prey, this is Hunter 1. Repeat your position. I say again, repeat your position." Commander Reynolds's calm, almost leisurely voice came back, clear as a bell across the water. "With pleasure, Admiral. We are currently admiring your wake. Suggest you check your 6. A beat of stunned silence hung in the control room of the Lionfish, and then it happened. A single, whooping cheer broke the tension, and then the entire submarine erupted. A spontaneous, roaring cheer echoed through the cramped compartments, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy and relief. Men pounded on the steel walls, on each other's backs, their faces split with grins of disbelief and triumph. They had done it. They had sailed into the jaws of the dragon and emerged unseen. Commander Reynolds, laughing, turned to Larkin. The doctor stood frozen, the stopwatch dangling from his fingers, his face pale. Tears were streaming from his eyes, not of sorrow but of a vindication so profound it was almost painful. Reynolds extended a hand. "Doctor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you did it. Larkin, his eyes wet with the tears of a lifetime of struggle, shook the offered hand firmly. He had won. Back at the naval base, the news spread like wildfire. The crew of the USS Lionfish were no longer the butt of jokes. They were legends. As they secured the lines at the pier, they were greeted not with smirks, but with stares of a new and profound respect, a respect bordering on awe. They looked at Dr. Larkin, who disembarked with Commander Reynolds, as if he were a magician, a man who could bend the very laws of physics. Reynolds clapped Larkin on the shoulder, a gesture of genuine camaraderie that would have been unthinkable just a day before. "Doctor, I am officially a believer," he said, his voice booming across the pier for all to hear. "You've given us a ghost's cloak. I'd take that into battle any day of the week." Across the bustling pier, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the administration building. Admiral Davies approached, his face a grim, unreadable mask. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by the hollowed outlook of a man whose career, long certainty, had been shattered in a single, humiliating afternoon. He walked with the stiff, deliberate gait of a man heading to his own execution. He stopped directly in front of Larkin. The surrounding sailors and officers fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. There was a long, tense silence, broken only by the cry of a distant gull. Davies did not apologize. The words were not in him. He couldn't bring himself to admit his own foolishness, his own blind arrogance. But he looked Larkin directly in the eye, and in that gaze was a universe of defeat. "Your coating," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth, "will be classified at the highest level, effective immediately. You will have unlimited resources. A new department will be formed under your sole command. The project is a go." He turned, without another word, and walked away, his back ramrod straight. It was the most profound, complete, and satisfying surrender Larkin could have ever imagined. Dr. Robert Larkin's mad invention, officially designated Project Alberic after a dwarf from Germanic mythology who owned a cloak of invisibility, would become one of the most crucial and closely guarded military secrets of the 20th century. In the closing year of the war, and for decades that followed, the anechoic coating was rapidly applied to the entire U.S. submarine fleet. A montage of history unfolded, showing the sleek, black-hulled submarines of the Cold War, the impossibly large Ohio-class boomers, and the deadly Hunter, killer subs of the Los Angeles class, all clad in a perfected version of Larkin's formula. They were the silent predators of the deep, the invisible guardians and unseen threats that shaped the geopolitical landscape. The foundation of all modern stealth technology, from the F-117 Nighthawk to the B-2 Spirit bomber, could be traced back to a cluttered, chaotic lab and a stubborn, brilliant man who dared to imagine a pillow for a canyon wall. His invention changed the face of naval warfare forever, giving American submarines an unprecedented advantage and saving countless lives by making them invisible ghosts beneath the waves. Years later, in the early 1970s, an older, deeply respected Dr. Larkin stood on a pier at Groton, Connecticut. The nickname Mad Larkin was a forgotten relic of a bygone era. He was now a revered naval consultant, a living legend whose portrait hung in the halls of the Pentagon. He wore a simple tweed jacket, his hair now a distinguished, uniform white. He stood watching as a new class of nuclear submarine, impossibly large and coated in the latest evolution of his black skin, slipped its moorings. It moved with an eerie silence, a black leviathan gliding without a ripple out of the harbor. It disappeared into the vast blue ocean, leaving no trace of its passage. Larkin didn't smile, but a look of deep, quiet satisfaction settled on his face. His impossible idea was now a silent guardian of the seas, a testament to the power of a single, stubborn, brilliant mind against the world.